All right, listen up, nacho chips. Quiet down, crispy potatoes. This is the moment Velveeta's been preparing you for, and you're not about to crack under pressure. Today's the day to go all in on the drip. Velveeta's Heat and Eat Queso is the MVP of any game day spread, so stick by them, and you'll be golden. Now get out there and make delicious history. No tailgate party is complete without Velveeta.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So our orders get all backed up. We're drowning in paperwork, then actually drowning. Carol is fighting off sharks with a stapler, and pirates are pillaging the office copier, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant goes beyond the resume, using unique insights to deliver a smarter shortlist. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hunting Stories podcast, The Hunter's Brief. I'm your host Michael, and I apologize the cord broke, and so I'm using a different mic today. But this is the show where we are going to slow things down and explain why hunting in the United States looks the way that it does today. This isn't about weekly headlines, this isn't about arguments online, this is about history. Because every season you follow, every tag you buy, every limit you respect, all of it exists for a reason. And those reasons go back to a time when America almost lost its wildlife entirely. Today's episode is about market hunting, what it was, why it exploded, how it nearly wiped out wildlife across the continent, and why modern hunting only exists because market hunting ended. If you grew up hunting in the United States, the system just feels normal. You know when seasons open, you know how many animals you can take, you know you need a license, and you know there are consequences if you break the rules. It's easy to assume that that's just how hunting has always worked, but historically, that's not the case. For most of American history, hunting was completely unregulated, and the lack of regulations nearly collapsed wildlife populations across the entire continent. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to a very different America. In the early 1800s, the United States was expanding rapidly. New towns were being built, railroads were spreading west, cities were growing, industry was booming, and wildlife, well, it was everywhere. Bisons covered the Great Plains. Passenger pigeons filled the sky. Waterfowl packed wetlands and river bottoms. Deer, elk, turkeys existed across vast ranges. But there was no concept of wildlife management, no state agencies, no federal conservation laws, and no scientific oversight. Wildlife was considered an open access resource, meaning anyone could take as much as they wanted, whenever they wanted, and for any reason. That system works only as long as harvests stay limited. Once harvests become commercial, it entirely collapses. Market hunting wasn't accidental. It was a business. Professional hunters killed wildlife specifically to sell it. Meat was sold in urban markets. Feathers were sold to fashion houses. Hides, they were processed into leather. Bones, they were even used for fertilizer and glue and in other industrial products. This wasn't small scale. Market hunters often killed hundreds of thousands of animals in a single season. And because there were no limits, nothing stopped them. If animals were present, they were killed. If prices went up, harvests increased. If populations declined, hunters simply moved on to the next area. The system rewarded speed, efficiency, and volume, but not restraint. It's important to understand why market hunting grew so fast. In the 1800s, refrigeration was limited, right? Meat was expensive in these cities. Wild game was often cheaper than domestic livestock. Fashion trends, and they demanded feathers. Industrial uses, they consumed all sorts of animal byproducts. Urban populations depended on rural resources, and wildlife filled that gap. Game meat was common on restaurant menus. Waterfowl were sold by the barrel. Passenger pigeons were a staple protein. As long as animals were available, the market kept pulling. For centuries, wildlife survived human harvest because killing animals was slow, and that changed in the 1800s. Railroads allowed fresh meat to be shipped nationwide. Ice harvesting preserved carcasses and meat. Firearms became faster and more reliable. Telegraphs coordinated supply with demand. Wildlife went from local resource to national commodity. A single market hunter could supply an entire city. Populations that seemed infinite collapsed almost overnight. Passenger pigeons were uniquely vulnerable. They lived in massive flocks, and they nested communally. They followed predictable migration patterns, and market hunters exploited that. Entire nesting colonies were targeted. Adults were killed, young birds were harvested from nests, rail cars hauled birds east by the ton. Again, there was no seasons, no limits, and no protections. By the time laws were proposed, it was already too late. The last passenger pigeon died in 1914. Its extinction shocked the nation, not just because a species disappeared, but because it proved abundance meant nothing without restraint. The bison slaughter, right? The bison destruction was both economic and political. Hides were valuable, bones were profitable, and the meat was sold. At the time, removing bison weakened indigenous tribes who also depended on them. Railroad hunters killed bison by the thousands. Skulls were stacked for processing. Entire herds vanished in a matter of years. By the late 1800s, fewer than 1,000 bison remained. Only private ranchers, zoos, and conservationists prevented total extinction. And this pattern repeated itself everywhere. White-tailed deer were eliminated from much of the eastern coast. Wild turkeys vanished from almost all states. Waterfowl populations plummeted. Elk and pronghorn populations declined sharply. Market hunters didn't stop when populations dropped. They followed the animals until there were none left. The system, frankly, it had no brakes. By the late 1800s, Americans noticed the change, right? Game animals that were once common were gone. Hunting trips, they started to fail. Local food sources disappeared. Hunters, of all people, began demanding reform, not because they hated hunting, but because they wanted it to survive. The birth of conservation thinking happened. It was a radical idea. Wildlife needed to be protected from markets, even if that meant limiting hunters. The idea formed from the foundation of American conservation. Wildlife should be, one, publicly owned, managed scientifically, harvested sustainably, and protected from commercial sale. And that idea reshaped the law. States outlawed the sale of wild game. Seasons were established, big game limits were enforced, and game wardens were hired. At the federal level, the Lacey Act of 1900 ended interstate trafficking of illegally taken wildlife. That law basically dismantled market hunting overnight. Without markets, the incentive completely disappeared. Hunting became recreational again, not commercial. Harvest became regulated, not unlimited. Wildlife became renewable, not disposable. Licenses funded conservation. Limits ensured sustainability. Seasons protected breeding cycles. This wasn't anti-hunting, it was pro-survival. Once protections were in place, wildlife rebounded. The deer returned. Turkeys began being introduced all over the country. Waterfowl stabilized, and of course, the American bison survived. This recovery wasn't accidental. It was planned, it was funded, and it was enforced by these new institutions. And who paid for it? Hunters. Hunters paid for it. And this matters because modern hunting laws exist because of the unregulated exploitation failed. When people criticize hunting without understanding market hunting, they misunderstand history. Hunting didn't destroy wildlife. Markets destroyed wildlife. Regulated hunting saved the animals of North America. If market hunting hadn't stopped and it had continued, there would be little time left to protect these animals today. With no seasons, no wildlife agencies, no hunting tradition, modern hunting exists because hunters accepted these limits and chose conservation over profit. That legacy really does matter. This has been the Hunter's Brief, guys. Thank you so much. If this episode helped explain why hunting is the way it is, share it with someone who thinks these rules appeared out of nowhere. Because understanding the past is how we protect the future of hunting. Thank you guys so much. Please give us a like, a follow, and give us some feedback. Send us a message on what you think of this episode, and if you want to hear more things like why the seasons exist, other laws that saved hunting, and add that into our typical news episodes as well as our story episodes, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Thank you guys again for tuning in. Now get out there and make some stories.